I'm Amy Zawi with the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report for Wednesday, March 24. When does human rights advocacy result in casualty? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. You may have heard that idiom or proverb at some point in your life. Sometimes we say that the best of intentions is met with unintended consequences. We often have some grace or forgiveness when we have a good intention, but the road to it or the outcome did not come out quite as planned. And sometimes people use the guise of good intention to sway someone else to go along a hellish road without even their knowing about it. We see this now all too often among what is called the progressive movement. And this movement is not just about political campaigns and running for office here in the U.S. or in other democracies in Europe and abroad. It is also fully entrenched in our college campuses and creeping into our K-12 curriculum. And that under a banner of what is called critical race theory. On college campuses, the guise of human rights advocacy is now soaked in the marinade of unfettered anti-Semitism. Progressive faculty, student groups led by seasoned so-called ex-terrorists, but I think they're current terrorists, and radical political leaders will cloak anti-Semitism in some other cause, such as race relations, equality, women's or LGBTQ advocacy, and even criminal justice reform. Even the defund the police movement. These movements, well, they're all leveraging something called intersectionality, the idea of hijacking one cause for another. And in doing so, they are aligning with anti-Semitic leaders and objectives whose goals are actually not to help any given group or identity. It's just to hate Jews in Israel. Not even the so-called Palestinians are aided by any of these groups. But the idea is to blame all the ills in the world, including the suffering of the Palestinians, on the Jews. The Jews are now labeled as white supremacists, white privileged, and colonists. And they are blamed for everything such as COVID-19 to global climate change. And it's either Jews or the State of Israel. They also set Jews in Israel up to a set of standards they don't use to judge other cultures or conditions, often while lying about these actual conditions they claim they want to reverse. Somehow a police brutality case in Missouri is the fault of the Israeli police department some 6,500 miles away. And the pro-Palestinian and LGBT community are at singing performances in Israel holding up signs to boycott it. There's a lot of irony there. At the Women's March in D.C., Zionists and Jewish women were told not to attend. Meanwhile, no police department in the world is better trained and have more humanitarian efforts in their methods than is Israel. Israel is the only Middle Eastern country where LGBTQ community members can live openly and freely without fear and even have a wonderful annual parade. More women in Israel hold seats in higher education than do men. And these women are of every shade of skin tone. They are Jew, Arab, Druze, and many of any religious affiliation, or none at all. My point here is that the conditions of pre-World War II Germany are alarmingly similar to the conditions of today in that atmosphere. Politicians and community activists are using so-called science or some higher moral virtue to condemn and vilify a people and a country within a set of criteria not equally applied to any other condition or culture, the very definition of anti-Semitism. The UN spends more time condemning Israel than policing the atrocities actually happening in China, North Korea, most of Africa, and within the borders of Israel's very own neighbors. Repeat a lie often enough, and people will believe it. And they do this by reviving the same old European anti-Semitic tropes repackaged as memes and political cartoons in mainstream media outlets and on social media platforms. These very same outlets and platforms that say that they are censoring and fact-checking just to keep the viewership safe and informed. But I'm not sure with what they or whose truth they want to have us informed with. Please be keeping yourselves alert. For more information on the history of anti-Semitism and the modern day rise of it, with the recycling of old ways, from the perspective of Jews, Christians, and others, consider donating $20 or more to the Jerusalem Connection Report, and you will receive a copy of the new book, The Casualty of Contempt, which is the true examination of the casualty of false good intentions cloaked in sinister motives, and how we can all identify it, learn why it's happening, and actually change it, even if it's one heart at a time. Shavua Tov, and have a great week.